Everybody see my PowerPoint okay? All right, wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Jackie Metcalf, and I am the Executive Director of Texas Health and Environment Alliance. This is our first town hall in quite some time, and we have a lot to go over. So first, we're going to go over some general updates that don't necessarily affect one single community that we work with, more so they're general across all of the communities that we work with. And then we will go into brief updates about each area throughout Harris County that we work with specifically. The San Jacinto River Waste Pit Superfund site, the Jones Road Groundwater Plume Superfund site, and a couple of items for Greater Fifth Ward. And then we'll also discuss the upcoming dates and times for the Zoom meetings that are specific to each of these communities, where we will discuss everything that we talk about today in much greater detail. Well, this is why you haven't seen me in a while. I have a infant son, and we have been enjoying our time together at home, getting to know one another and getting him big and strong. And he was born in July, and now it's time for us to get back in action with the community, and wanted to just introduce you guys to my son, our newest team member at THEA. All right, now down to business. Something that the city of Houston is offering that I wanted to bring to your attention is lead and copper testing in water that is supplied by the city of Houston. So one of my team members is going to drop the link to this in the chat. And if your water is supplied by the city of Houston, you can follow this link and take a brief survey. And through that survey, the city of Houston will determine if they believe you qualify to have your water tested. Now, they don't ask any demographic information, so it doesn't qualify. It's not looking to see if you qualify based off of income, type of housing unit, or anything like that. It is basically asking questions about your infrastructure, about your pipes, when your home was built, and those types of things. So they're offering this until October 29th. So if you are supplied water to your home by the city of Houston, I strongly encourage you to follow the link, take the questionnaire, and I'd love for you to follow up with us. If they do end up testing your water, I would love to hear if they found lead or copper, and you know, any feedback you have on the process. This came to my attention through some of the items I was looking into for Greater Fifth Ward, because we know that children in Greater Fifth Ward have among the highest blood lead levels in the state of Texas. And the homes, many of the homes there have lead paint that's flaking off, and that's when you really run into those problems. Then also old infrastructure for their water is another route of exposure, and it's also been found in soil in the area. So the city of Houston is offering this, but anyone who is supplied by the city of Houston can go take the survey and see if you qualify. All right. And if my team will be sure to monitor the chat, I see Sarah has a question in the chat about the link. All right, so before my maternity leave, and for much of this year, we hosted a health survey initiative, and we received hundreds of health surveys from members of the 3 communities that we work within. And from there, we assessed what types of cancer people were struggling with or were concerned about from each community. And then we requested that Texas Department of State Health Services conduct a cancer assessment for those communities and those types of cancer, as well as the types of cancers that they previously assessed. For example, around the Jones Road Superfund site, the state previously assessed leukemia in children, but that's the only type of cancer they've looked into there. And so we wanted to get up-to-date data for all of the types of cancer that you all are concerned about. And unfortunately, but not surprisingly, Department of State Health Services denied our request. They denied all of our requests, not just a single one. They denied the request for the communities around the San Jacinto River waste pits, for the communities in Greater Fifth Ward, and for the communities around the Jones Road Superfund site. So the agency wrote us that they don't feel our request meets the criteria or the guidelines for doing an assessment. And of course, our team right away went and pulled the guidelines, and we are of the position that we do meet their guidelines. And I have also consulted with toxicologists and other public health experts, and they too believe that we meet the guidelines. So we're pushing back on the agency for their denial. And you can anticipate an email from us in the next week, because we need your support. We need you to be telling the agency, as well as us as a representative of your voices, we need you to be telling the agency that your community is worth their time. And, really this comes down to, it's the agency's time and resources and money, right, for them to do these assessments. And it's unreasonable for them to completely blanket denial our requests across the board. And so one of the reasons, or one of the items in the guidelines that they're claiming we don't meet, is community support. And we know that we have that. So we are going to need your help to demonstrate that to the agency. So we will be sending out an email coming up with some call to action items and steps that you can take to show the agency that you do support receiving up-to-date information on your community's health. All right, so that's it for the general updates. And now we are going to roll into our program or project specific segment. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the San Jacinto River Waste Pits Superfund site. And we had some really big developments in the last 6 weeks specifically. It was like I got back from maternity leave and bam, there were all of these announcements. It was just perfect timing for me to get back up to speed and be able to act quickly when these announcements came out. So first I want to show you, just for reference here, the southern impoundment is outlined in yellow, and the southern impoundment, as the name indicates, is south of Interstate 10. It is almost completely landlocked on this little peninsula here. There is a portion of land that protrudes out to the southwest corner that goes into the river, but it's primarily landlocked. Then to the north, the other main pit or impoundment is the northern impoundment, which on an average tide is about 60% submerged in the river's water. So the major update that we received was that the EPA issued a unilateral administrative order for International Paper to clean up the southern impoundment. So back 4 years ago, we had the record of decision, right? The former administrator, Scott Pruitt, signed the record of decision ordering the cleanup of the waste pits of both of the impoundments. However, that took us into the remedial design phase of the Superfund process. So if you see this graphic here, which the EPA created, the record of decision right here was made 4 years ago. And that entered into the remedial design phase. Well, now we have just made it into the next phase only for the southern site. So I want to be clear on that distinction. This is not an order for the northern site. This is only an order for International Paper to clean up the southern site. So this is the order that takes us into remedial action, which is where we're going to actually see the construction. So up until now, they've been doing the investigating, they've been sampling and really delineating these sites, figuring out the true extent of these sites and how to clean them up and what's, best and safest to actually physically remove this waste material. So this order holds International Paper accountable. It does not hold Mimic, the waste management subsidiary, accountable. International Paper submitted an intent to comply, and we're not surprised they objected left and right to just about everything the EPA said in their order. However, the EPA has issued this federal order that if the responsible party, International Paper, does not comply, they risk penalties daily over $56,000. So they have said in their intent to comply, they will comply, but they don't agree. And that they also feel that Mimic, the waste management subsidiary, should be held accountable. I don't disagree. When you think about how the Superfund process works and identifying parties that are responsible, the EPA was very firm in the early years that they had substantial evidence, materials, documentation, projects for the land, etc., showing that Mimic was involved with the management and ownership of the land. So we'll see what comes of that. But nonetheless, no matter if it is just International Paper or if Mimic were to eventually be brought in some shape or form, this site is moving forward. And so the agency estimates about a year for procurement of materials and securing the contracts for the various workers and companies. And so we anticipate that you will actually see construction break ground at the southern pit in the fall of next year. This is a big deal. I know taking 4 years to get here is really frustrating, and none of this can happen fast enough, but this is a strong order from the federal government, and it is moving in the right direction. Now, the northern pit is not necessarily moving as quickly in the right direction. An interesting difference between the two sites is that at the northern impoundment, the EPA is holding Mimic accountable. So they're not only dealing with International Paper on the cleanup of that northern site, they're also dealing with waste management and their subsidiary, McGinnis Industrial Maintenance Corporation. So they conducted more sampling this summer, and we are currently waiting for the results of that sampling. And we are expected to have the final design, which is this step here, just before remedial action. So we're expected to have the final remedial design in the first quarter of 2022. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the Jones Road Groundwater Plume Superfund site. The map on the left, before I get into a little bit of the technical, the map on the left shows outlined in red the area that has a drilling restriction. Now there's a groundwater well drilling restriction that's been issued by the state and also by the county under this Superfund process. And the parcels of land that you see in orange, the EPA knows that those are properties supplied by a private groundwater well. The properties in blue are ones that are hooked up to city water. So they are not pulling from the underground plume of contamination. And as you can see, there are a lot of parcels that are not blue or orange. Those are ones that the agency has never made contact with. And it can be assumed that they are on groundwater wells because they have not been piped city water. So right here at the corner of Bearley Lane and Jones Road is the Superfund site. The plume here, we know, originally migrated to the west from the groundwater demand from the development of Cypress to the west. And the plume has since began to move back in the normal direction for groundwater flow in the area, which is south-southeast. All right, So we're in a really critical time for the Jones Road Superfund site. The EPA is set to release their 5-year review next year. They're doing all of the investigating of this 5-year review right now. So what does that mean? So the 5-year review is an important part of the Superfund process because it looks at the effectiveness of the cleanup plan. So the record of decision for this site has been amended on more than one occasion. And this 5-year review looks at what the latest record of decision has said and whether or not those items are being upheld, whether or not they're effective. One example right off the bat is that I referred to earlier is the restricted drilling area. While we know for sure that new wells are still being drilled in this area, they're just not being properly permitted. So right off the bat, that's one item that we know that the agency needs to do better on. So what we're working on at THEA is our technical team is going through all of the documents on the technical end, the data, the latest 5-year reviews, the older 5-year reviews, the record of decision, and we're forming our opinion of whether or not the items being done are sufficient. And we found many concerning items, 2 of which I want to share with you. So the ROD requires that short-term institutional controls are put in place to provide notice to new landowners and reminders to existing landowners the presence of the contaminants above remedial goals in the groundwater beneath the property. So essentially, the record of decision, what that means is that the EPA should be reminding homeowners who are on groundwater wells that they are potentially pulling from a plume of contamination. We know that the groundwater in this area is contaminated. And so now we see that the EPA is not implementing these institutional controls. So the current landowners, the current homeowners, the people who are looking to purchase land or purchase homes in this area or businesses are not being notified that, in fact, the parcel they're purchasing has groundwater that is not safe and that it is supplied by a well. And so these homeowners, the residents, the community members, the patrons of businesses in the area are, there's a good chance that they're unknowingly being exposed. So I find that really unsettling. I know what it feels like to be a community member and find out that the government knows your water is contaminated and nobody's knocked on your door and nobody sent you a letter. And that's part of why we do what we do at THEA. And so that's one item that we will definitely be commenting to the agency on. Another item that was just, mind-blowing to me that trails behind this is the EPA's own language. They wrote, since not all private wells have been plugged and many private wells remain in use, the primary exposure pathway at the site is ingestion of groundwater. So meaning they know that people who have wells and ingest, and another statement from them said also bathing and ingesting in this water could bring exposure unknowingly to families in the area. So we will be commenting here, let's see, mid-November. We have a plan in place over the next about 8 weeks of how we're going to proceed with all of the various items to basically tell the agency our 2 cents, right? In our expert opinion, with our technical team and our knowledge of the community on the ground, here's what we have to say. And so in doing that, we're going to be gathering support from elected officials. We're definitely much stronger if we have a united voice. And we will submit formal comments to the EPA mid-November. Then we're going to rally for public support. So, I always say, what good is a report if it sits on a shelf, right? And so when we formulate our opinion and put that in writing, then we will be going to all of you, to the community members, and seeking your support. And then we will await the EPA's release of their 5-year review next year. So like I said, they're doing all the groundwork right now, and then they're going to actually publish their report next year. And so that's when we'll really know for sure if they took our position into consideration, if they listened to us as a voice for the community, as an advocate for public health, and also if they listen to the public officials and what they have to say. All right, lots of writing here. Not my favorite style, but there's several things that have been going on in the Greater Fifth Ward that are call to actions that are really important. And I wanted to go ahead and just lay these items out for you. And first, we will start with Mayor Turner's call to action for the EPA. So Mayor Turner asked the EPA to get involved with the Union Pacific creosote contamination in Fifth Ward. So the contamination from Union Pacific that we know is underground for part of the Fifth Ward community is currently under a state program. And the state and Union Pacific have been working on a cleanup plan and these proceedings for many years now, but the community members live in fear. You know, they know that there is a plume underground, and that these contaminants can not only, you know, that they've not only lived with them in certain surface areas in their community, but that these contaminants can come up from underground as vapors. And so rightfully so, there's a lot of concern here. And so Mayor Turner there was quoted recently with this statement in the Houston Chronicle. And he wrote to the head of the EPA on June 25th, stating, "We believe that EPA has the ability to use its investigative and enforcement tools, as well as its ability to participate in and influence ongoing state permitting actions to drive more robust, thorough, and lasting environmental solutions." Okay, so that was on June 25th. So not necessarily saying, hey, EPA, come in and take this over, but more so asking them to see that this is done right, that this is done with more robust technologies, and really in a faster fashion than what's currently been taking place. So then in September of this year, the EPA sent a letter to Union Pacific with 2 primary questions. First, they asked, when was Union Pacific first aware of the contamination? And then the second major question the EPA asked was, what is the plan for cleanup? So this is a really great step. You know, I have been extremely impressed by the environmental movement that this community has been able to cultivate, and the progress they've seen. Now, I know, you know, just like San Jacinto or Jones Road, when you're living in a community with contamination and these processes are so incredibly slow, nothing can happen fast enough. But these are long-term efforts, and you have to celebrate every mountain peak, because there are valleys, and these are long-term, you know, hikes, if you will. And these are definitely milestones to be proud of. These are good achievements and definitely moving in the right direction. And having the administrator of the EPA you know, write a letter to Union Pacific is a big deal. Asking these questions should be answered, and we'll keep you posted on what develops from the EPA's letter. All right, the next item that I wanted to let you all know about is that this month, Mayor Turner actually talked about buyouts in the community of Fifth Ward. Now, the Houston Chronicle recently supported that the city of Houston actually has a buyout plan, but that they've not shared the details, and that they have been working on a buyout plan for this area for many years. Well, buyouts aren't always easy. When we talk to people from Fifth Ward, a lot of them don't want to leave. Some do. Some want out. They want out. They don't feel safe day in and day out, and they want out. But some don't. And we actually previously hosted a conversation with Lois Gibbs, who is coined the mother of Superfund. And she had over 800 households in her community in Niagara Falls, New York, relocated by presidential order. And so in our presentation with Lois, she said, on one hand, you can win relocation. That's one thing. But on the other hand, it is the social structure of your community that is going to get torn apart. And she's absolutely right. She's worked with communities across the country for over 40 years who have fought contamination within their communities. Many of them have fought relocation. Some of them have won. And when you ask Lois who pays for it, she says, I don't care. She's like, just, that's not for the people to worry about. That's for the agencies and the polluters to figure out. But like I said, when you talk to folks from Fifth Ward, it's a tight-knit community, and there are generations that were raised there, that live there, that don't want to leave. So this is a difficult situation, but the latest developments with the city is that they are talking about buyouts in this area. All right, so a lot of the items we went over so far have many different developments and items in the works. So we have strategically selected the dates of our upcoming community meetings based on when we anticipate to have more information on the various topics. So the next community specific meeting is going to be for the San Jacinto River Coalition at the end of this month. So October 26th at 6 p.m. we will meet to discuss the San Jacinto River Waste Pits Superfund site. And by then, I anticipate the EPA will have released the sampling data that was conducted at the Northern Waste Pit over this summer. All right, and then the next community meeting after that is the Jones Road Community Meeting, November 16th at 6 p.m. Now, we will have just submitted our formal report to the EPA on our opinions of the 5-year review and the efficacy of the record of decision and the implementation that's going on there at that site. So that's going to be the perfect time for us to get together and really get into those details of what the agency said they were going to do 5 years ago and what they've actually done. There's a lot of really good meat and potatoes there, so I'm excited for that one. And then December 7th, we will be meeting with the communities of Greater Fifth Ward. And in that meeting, we hope to have more information on the EPA's letter to Union Pacific and the mayor's call for buyouts, as well as some more details on the health. To date, we have primarily been involved with the cancer cluster that is within these communities, that several reports have come out, stating various types of cancer at abnormally high rates within these communities over the last couple of years. So we hope to also have some more information there. All right, so in the chat, you will see the link to take the survey if you are interested in having your City of Houston tap water tested for lead and copper. And then you will also see the link to our YouTube channel where it's a specific link to the video of our presentation with Lois Gibbs on buyouts. And then you will also have a link to our website where you can access on our homepage links to register for all of these upcoming events. All right, so let's go ahead and start with some questions. And this is regarding the Jones Road Superfund site. It says, so the state acknowledges that there are contaminated wells and ingestion of unsafe water in the Jones area, but Department of Health and Safety denied all the health survey requests. Great question, great point. Yes, they did. And, one of the things that just really doesn't make sense about their denial for this community is that, Texas Department of State Health Services, or I'll call them DSHS for short, DSHS has only looked into childhood leukemia rates in the community. And that was at the request of some local mothers who essentially talking with one another and talking specifically with the librarian at one of the local schools found out that, there seemed to be an abnormal amount of children struggling from cancer and more specifically from leukemia. The elementary school literally has a bell that if you or a family member have ever gone through chemo and or radiation, you ring the bell when you complete your treatment. And so they literally, they have a bell that when a student at the elementary school finishes their treatment for their cancer, they ring the bell with their classmates. Where is that normal and where is that okay? We know that this Superfund site, the contamination in the groundwater, was discovered at a local daycare and gymnastics facility. We know that children have been exposed. We know that adults have been exposed. That's no question. And so it is, appalling that the request has been denied for more recent data and for additional data. Going door to door in the community, one day some of our volunteers were talking with a resident, and the resident could stand there and point house to house where people had cancer or had died of cancer, and point also house to house which ones were leukemia. And it wasn't just the children that, we have found to have leukemia in this community. It's adults as well. So knowing that there are open exposure pathways and that there are cancer concerns, we don't believe that it is appropriate for the state to deny the request. All right. So here the next question is about buyouts or about Greater Fifth Ward. And so it's Christina said, it is a generational community, but also many families cannot afford to move even with a buyout. They would not be able to afford the taxes in other neighborhoods and may not have equal access to transportation in those neighborhoods. Spot on. This is such a common issue when it comes to buyouts. People, may have paid off their home or, have specific rates that, that would change if a buyout were to take place. And so you're not only looking at losing that social structure, but you are also then faced with what is the value that they're going to give you on your home? Can you come up with something comparable for that value? Probably not. Almost always, working with communities across the country on buyouts, I through and through hear that it's not comparable. So it's definitely a big problem when the government starts talking buyouts. Okay, Carolyn. All right, so Carolyn commented, plausible deniability. If you don't know about it, you do not have to take action. You have a good point. And I believe you're referring to the state denying our request, right? It's a big problem. It's a big problem. We know that the last time they looked at the cancer rates around the waste pits on the east side, they looked into 17 types of cancer. 14 of them came back statistically significant. That's huge. That's a lot. So we've asked them to look at those and then some. It's a big problem. Samantha, this is absolutely heart-wrenching. People shouldn't have to move due to negligence of a company. I understand. I agree. And there's problems everywhere, right? So how do you even feel confident leaving one community that you're going to be going to another community and not be faced with this with similar or different issues? I agree. Marlene, do you need a legislator and county commissioners request for a full status report before your November submission? Yes, Marlene, we would like to meet with our legislators and commissioners in the first, I believe it's 2 weeks of November. So yes, we should definitely powwow on that. And we are going to have a letter. This is regarding the Jones Road Superfund site. We're going to have a letter. We're going to attempt to have a one-page letter that we will give to the elected officials that they can lift and put on their letterhead if they so choose. We're going to make it very easy on them. Say, we might have a 10, 12 page formal report that we give to the EPA, but we will pull the main points from that and give those to the elected officials and ask for their support. And we'll be doing that before we submit the report to the EPA in mid-November. All right, now I've got a bit of a longer question here. Give me a second just to read it. Okay. All right, so Daniel is asking here, what does the EPA and responsible parties plan on doing with the legacy plumes that are going to be removed from the southern impoundment? Have they identified a specific remediation technology that will be used, or will it be removed, incinerated, and the residual material be landfilled? Great question. So it better not be incinerated. The EPA has said very firmly that they do not support incineration of dioxin because the molecule cannot be 100% broken down. So what you wind up with when you incinerate dioxin, and Daniel, you sound a bit like you know what you're talking about here, so you might know this. You wind up with a not in our backyard problem, right? You're taking it from one community and putting it on another, essentially, because if you're incinerating it and you're not fully breaking down the molecule, you're putting it up into the air, which is then going to come down on the community, the land, the water, what have you. So the EPA has said that they do not support incineration, and we will be watching very closely to see that that does not take place. The plan, roughly for the southern impoundment is going to be removal of the land of the soil that is above the contamination. In most of the areas, you have to go down 8 feet or greater to actually reach the contamination. It's going to be removed. So they'll go down to the varying depths and remove that material and haul it off to be stored or landfilled, if you will, to go to a permitted facility that handles this type of waste on a regular basis. So a facility that, that's what they do day in and day out, is manage specific classifications of waste. It does not appear that this waste is going to be disposed of as hazardous waste. It looks like it is going to go in a different class of a landfill. But to the best of my knowledge, the location and the specific landfill have not yet been established. All right, Kimberly, is there a short info sheet on the issues happening within 5th Ward that could be easy to share? I feel like a lot of my family members, Spanish speakers, thank you for that note, aren't aware of this. I was working on making one in Spanish, but I wasn't sure if all the facts I stated were correct. So I decided to ask. Lovely. Thank you so much for asking that question. And our assistant director, Rachel, is going to go ahead and take a shot at answering this one.
Sure. So yes, we are actually working on completing full fact sheets for each of our communities. I believe that the Fifth Ward one is either done or almost done, and we do have it in both English and Spanish. So we'll be able to get that out to our email list and our communities as soon as everything is approved and finished and ready to go.
Thank you. All right. So please feel free to contact any of us either directly in the chat, or you can always reach out to us through our website, and let us or remind us that you would like access to the fact sheet, and we'll be sure to get that over to you. We'd even be happy to mail you copies in Spanish and or English if you'd like. Okay, another question here in the chat. Are they required to tell new home buyers or land buyers this information? No, I don't know what community, specifically you're referring to, but, that would be in a deed restriction and, or an institutional control. And, they're not in play, or they're not being done by the agency. They're not being required. And so I know, like, for example, if you were to buy a property that bordered the actual Superfund site, so say the waste pits, if you were buying a property that bordered that southern impoundment, just say, then, they would have to tell you that, your property that you were looking at purchasing was borders a federal Superfund site. But for other places in the neighborhood, there's nothing in place requiring that. And that's one of the things that we look for when the Superfund sites progress through the Superfund process, is that these institutional controls are not only put in place, but they are adhered to. So kind of like the what good is a report if it just sits on a shelf? What good is an institutional control? What good is the requirement for a future landowner to be notified of, say, the groundwater plume at Jones Road? What good is that if nobody's upholding that? And so that's part of our role as a watchdog entity, right? Is to make sure that these items that the agency sets out themselves, that they say need to be done to protect public health, to make sure that they're doing them. And, I also, another reason why we need the community support to help hold their feet to the fire and make sure they do what they're really tasked with doing. All right, Carolyn, your meetings teach us we have to do deep research on an area, not just the neighborhood we want to move to, but the surrounding area when a move is contemplated. Absolutely. Absolutely. Where does the water come from? What's the historical land use? What's, from an eagle eye perspective, what's around the home, maybe not just next door. It is definitely very important to do thorough research before you move or purchase land, because at the end of the day, you can exhaust the research and still not be aware of things, but at least if you put your best foot forward, you can try your best to make sure, that you're not moving from one hazard to another. Texas A&M created a website, and I believe it's like an interactive GIS like mapping website, and it was A&M Galveston that created it. I think they've since sold it to a private entity, but nonetheless, it's called Buyer Beware, like BUY, Buyer Beware. And so that it has information on dams in the area, hazardous sites in the area, historical flooding in the area. They layered in all kinds of information, even for example, if there's a dam in the area, is the dam in need of repairs? Is the dam up to date with what inspections say need to be done? And so a lot of these things that we typically don't think about when we're buying a home. All right, let's see. Candace and Eddie Caligari, what did you want the state to do that they denied? So we asked the state to study the health of the 3 communities that we work with. So we had a health survey initiative campaign running where we received hundreds of surveys telling us about the health, well, specific community members' health across Harris County. And so based upon the types of cancer that we heard about in these various communities, we asked the state to do a cancer risk assessment, or a cancer assessment, sorry, in the 3 communities, and they denied that request. And that would basically, Candace, that would basically tell us whether or not there are cancer rates at there are cancer rates that are abnormally high. Okay. Carolyn, how is the EPA classifying the remediated material from the southern impoundment for disposal? Same as the northern impoundment? Yes. So the EPA has not landed firmly on a disposal classification for the waste material in either of the waste pits. So there's this latest round of sampling, and then there is going to be sampling that's conducted as they remediate the Superfund sites. And so that will ultimately determine the waste classification. Now, why is that important? The waste classification is important because that essentially dictates how the waste is disposed of and monitored or not for the lifetime of these contaminants. Now, we know that if the waste were to stay in the pits like they are right now, that is right, if Mother Nature didn't continue disrupting these sites. But if they were to stay there, then the EPA has estimated that these contaminants would remain toxic for upwards of 750 more years. So we're talking about high concentrations of highly toxic substances. But when you look at how waste is classified in our country and what is hazardous, there is literally a handful of chemicals that actually make that list. And so hazardous in the disposal world is a bit more of a buzzword than what you and I would think would classify something as hazardous. So it gets pretty technical and sticky there, but yes, the same, Carolyn. Okay. Great question. If Houston buys out the 5th ward, are they allowed to develop it? So I don't think that it would be like the city of Houston, to the best of my knowledge, that it wouldn't be the city, in fact, that would buy it out. Oftentimes what you see in these situations, if there are buyouts because the land is too contaminated to live on, the facility would essentially, sometimes what you see is a facility will, fence off that area and restrict access to that area. But sometimes you do see the land remediated, redeveloped. You do see, once it's remediated to what is considered safe, then it could be redeveloped. So there are different ways that it could go for the future land use of that area. And I believe what I've read about the mayor's call for buyouts was, that the threat is now, that there, he believes, is an ongoing threat, excuse me. And so that's why there's this sense of urgency, because this contamination has been there for so long, and Union Pacific has been dragging their feet to do anything about it. And so while Union Pacific and the state are going back and forth about the future plans here, people are at risk for exposure. Okay, shouldn't the buyout be mandatory based on the contamination? Well, Love Canal, for example, the first Superfund site in the US, that was a mandatory evacuation signed by the president, evacuating over 800 homes. Due to the amount of contaminants readily, available in the environment for exposure, seeping up from the ground, seeping into people's basements. And so you had very high levels there. Now, what we've seen in the limited testing that's taken place in Fifth Ward, we've seen lower levels of these volatile contaminants migrating up through the ground's subsurface and vaporizing into the air. So the lower levels are not high enough to prompt an emergency, so to speak, situation. You know, it's so frustrating for all of us, though, right? Just like, you know, earlier we were on a session with some public health researchers and scientists, and we were talking about contaminants in groundwater wells. And you know, I brought up the groundwater wells around the San Jacinto River waste pits. All but one of those wells has tested just below what the government considers safe, even though we know there's no safe level of dioxin that a human could be exposed to. There's still a threshold. And literally, some of the groundwater wells tested 2 parts per trillion below that threshold, which legally prompts no action. So what we know to be safe for human exposure and what the levels are that require a government response or an emergency reaction are not the same, unfortunately. All right, so I saw that Lisa and then Rachel posted the Buyers Beware website from Texas A&M Galveston. Thank you very much for posting that. Okay, let's see. All right, so Carolyn Stone commented in the chat that at the Baytown Nurture Nature Festival, which was this last weekend, she spoke with a realtor that was interested in the information regarding environmental issues to alert her clients. Maybe realtors could provide materials to share with prospective home or land buyers. And we have another comment here in the chat along the lines of realtors. And then Christina commented, I would definitely believe that it would be under the realtor's ethic code that they would have to disclose the information on Superfund sites if they're made aware of it. I'm not sure. Definitely that's not my field of expertise, so I wouldn't be able to advise on that. But I will tell you, like Carolyn's experience, we have had realtors contact us in the past, very interested to have information so that they could advise their clients in the right direction. You know, just like when you're working with a client and the client wants to know what the school districts are like, or, you know, what the area hiking trails are like. You know, it's just another layer of what people could be interested in. I wish we were all interested in these things or aware that we should be, but I definitely, you know, welcome that education of realtors just the same. All right, Lance. Something that does not get addressed is that you may be speaking about a single contaminant, but we are being exposed to other agents, air pollution, etc. So mixtures are not addressed. Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up, Lance. You raise a really valid point. So oftentimes when we're talking about contamination, say in the groundwater, let's use the Jones Road area as an example. The original chemical that was dumped is referred to as perc. Over time, that perc breaks down, the chemical degrades. As that chemical breaks down or degrades in the groundwater plume, it forms new compounds. And the last compound that it breaks down into is vinyl chloride. We've probably all heard of vinyl chloride. It is just as toxic, if not even more toxic than the original product perc. So when we're looking at public health, you know, we can't just look at it with the lens of the people of this community are potentially being exposed to the perc that was dumped. We have to be looking at it from more of a holistic view, and that, you know, no, they in fact might be receiving exposure or might have had exposure to more contaminants in the groundwater through time. Plus, we have to consider, that we live in one of the largest, if not the largest, industrial complexes in the world. And we have exposures through our air. Anywhere we have free radical exposures, right? So what is the lifetime accumulation or buildup within our bodies of this toxic burden? I remember when I first found out I had heavy metal poisoning. Oh gosh, I think I don't even remember exactly. I want to say it was like a decade ago, and that I had, I think, 20 different heavy metals. Sorry, my mom brain is real. my son took my brain, but I want to say, I had around 20 different heavy metals in my body, and I'll never forget the doctor looking at me, an internal medicine doctor looking at me and saying, "Jackie, we don't know what this does to the human body. We don't know how these different elements and chemical compounds behave when they have the opportunity to bond and interact within your body." They said, "We understand when you have lead poisoning and what the potential outcomes are. We understand when you have mercury or arsenic and what the potential outcomes are. But we don't understand when you have lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, thorium, all of these different compounds or elements in one human body." And so thinking about that with respect to the example I gave at Jones Road, where you have these different chemical compounds that one's being exposed to, plus, potentially lifestyle factors, it's really hard to know what the outcomes collectively could be. Right, Carolyn mentioned accumulated exposure is also not addressed. Normally only the exposure level at the time of testing. And that's spot on. And that's why, when we're looking at groundwater testing, you need more than a one-time test. You need to be testing through time, because groundwater moves. It doesn't move quickly, but it does move. And not only does groundwater move, but these contaminants have the ability to change underground. And so we absolutely need to be looking at more of the long-term exposures than a one-time short look into what we might be potentially exposed to. All right. Okay, so I think that I have covered everything here. So, and look, right on time. All right, wonderful. All right, well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening for our first town hall in quite some time. I'll look forward to seeing you in the community specific meetings that will start later this month. And again, you can access the information to register for those events and the dates and times on our website. And if you did not get any of the links in the chat, or if you joined us late, someone who missed this, we will have this recording on our Zoom, not on our Zoom, on our YouTube channel before the end of this week. So you can find a short write-up there, as well as this information on our YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining us.
Jackie, we have one more question in the Q&A from Daniel.
Okay. All right, Daniel, let's see. Thank you. That moved out of Q&A earlier, and I needed to get back to it. Okay, so just one more question. Could you please shed some light on how the state and federal EPA and the responsible parties intend to incorporate Section 219 and Section 223 of President Biden's Executive Order 14008? Have they incorporated Justice 40 initiatives in their remedial action plan, along with their plans for providing federal investments for economic opportunities to these disadvantaged communities? Okay, I can't speak to some of that because I'm not an attorney, but what I can speak to is that the initiatives that have been set out in some of the more recent plans under the Biden administration absolutely fall short. So, one item has to do with polluters pays and looking at taking who pays for the actual cost of the Superfund, and that burden and potentially a Superfund task, taking that burden off of the taxpayer when there are not parties that are found to be responsible. And that falls short. It would not effectively work like those that were behind it intended for it to. And then also, if we're talking about the Fifth Ward community, items there would fall short as well when it comes to what would be invested in the communities and what the economic opportunities would be. All right, it says that Rachel Jordan has some items to add here.
No, I was just putting that you were answering it currently.
Oh, okay. All right. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. Good night.